Welcome back to Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. We're going to go directly to the phones. We've got Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report online. Scott, how are you today?
Doing well, Matt. Glad that the election is over and glad that you're back.
You're done traveling around. You were going crazy there for a while.
Oh, they wore me out, brother. But we're still standing. We're all still here.
A huge election. Now, I want to start off because one of the big things that people have been so worried about is this national election that is so close. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, all over the nation and especially in the state of Texas, it was not close. I mean, we're talking this. If you wanted to talk about a potential red wave meeting a blue wave and not much changing, that's kind of it seems to be what you had here in Texas.
In Texas, I would say you probably did have a blue wave. It just hit the big red brick wall, is what happened. Republicans were organized. They had their stuff together. That's the nice version of it, right?
For once.
For usually they do, but I will say that I had conversations going back to January with Republican consultants who work on these campaigns, who had said repeatedly that, and I think this is fair, that in 2018 there were plenty of Republican candidates who just straight up got caught with their pants down. They didn't take the threat of Democratic gain seriously in 2018. I mean, they weren't really paying attention to what was happening with the backlash to President Trump, backlash to Senator Cruz, and this Beto mania that was going on at the time. And, of course, we still had straight-ticket voting in 2018, and so there were a lot of Democrats who just had coattails from Beto and from the backlash to Trump. I don't think that if they had taken it more seriously that there would have been 12 new Democrats in the Texas House and 2 new Democrats in the Texas Senate and two congressional districts that would have flipped from from Republican to Democratic in Dallas and Houston in Texas. And learning from that lesson of how they really suffered some losses in 18, I think Republicans were ready to go with money, with the kind of resources they needed, and a real strategy to hold the line. I mean, and look, lots of money was spent on both sides. I mean, in Texas House races alone, they probably spent, Matt, more than $30 million only to have one Republican lose and one Democrat lose.
Yeah.
So they were really, fighting each other to a draw. Basically, Republicans held the line with what they had.
Yeah. So one of the most interesting things going on, if you watch Twitter as well as the Texas news, is the fact that we've got a speaker race about to happen. Yep. And, I mean, you've got a lot of movement. Now, the Republican caucus, I guess, originally had said under Bonnen that they were going to vote as a group, but after what happened with Bonnen and some of the other things that happened there, it looks like that coalition may be dissolved.
That specific group probably had a hand in working things behind the scenes with what has unfolded. I mean, it looks like we do have a presumptive speaker now. As you probably saw, a guy named Dade Phelan from Beaumont, Texas, has said now that he has sufficient support to be the next Speaker of the Texas House. He announced earlier in the week, I was there for a press conference the day after the election, and he had said that, at the Texas Capitol, he said at that time he had enough votes. And then after a meeting yesterday of some Republicans who gathered at the Austin airport, of all places, Phelan and Chair Jeannie Morrison, who's from Victoria, Texas, they had both been vying for Speaker. She withdrew from the race, pretty much clearing the path for Phelan to go ahead and be the next Speaker of the House. So we do have a presumptive Speaker here, and of course we can talk more about who he is and what side of things he comes from, if you like. It's interesting, in the Texas House, sometimes the person who emerges as the next leader often is somebody who isn't well known around the rest of the state. It's just it's one of the other state representatives. Beaumont's not the biggest city in Texas, and not everybody familiar with Chairman Phelan and who he is and what he's all about. But the members of the House know him, and it looks like they're putting their trust in him for now to be the next presiding officer.
So is this did the Democrats have some say in who was chosen, or did the Republicans get together and decide this?
It looks like Phelan was able to put together a bipartisan coalition. The Democrats absolutely did have a say in it. The Republican caucus, they say that they are united in this decision. they did have some disagreements among the Republicans because, there were several folks who were vying for Speaker originally. As soon as, and I'll tell you this, Matt, it's interesting, on election night, I think probably around 8 o'clock, 8:30 that evening, when it was pretty clear that Republicans were going to keep the majority in the Texas House, the members of the House all started texting and calling each other furiously because they wanted to figure out, who are they going to support for Speaker. Prior to the election, they didn't even know if the Democrats or the Republicans would be in the majority, so a lot of them were kind of keeping their powder dry and not really saying a whole lot about any of this. But as soon as it was clear that the Republicans were going to keep it, the conversation immediately shifted to, who are we going to support for Speaker? And, of course, Democrats wanted to be part of a governing coalition, as they have been under both Speaker Bonin and Speaker Strauss in the past over the last decade or so. It's not new, right, that that governing in Austin is more bipartisan than it is in Washington, and that's one of the things that we like about it around here anyway, because everybody has a seat at the table in a vast, diverse state. It's not about
even heads of committees and whatnot have been given to Democrats by some of the Republican speakers.
That's right, and traditionally it's always been a bipartisan exercise. When before 2003, when Republicans took over the majority in the Texas House for the first time in 100 years back then, before that it was Republican. It was a Republican chance for committee chairmanships as well. They had a chance at it when there was a Democratic speaker, who would operate in bipartisan fashion as well. So it's a long tradition going back. Whether the speaker was Democratic or Republican, they would often choose members of the other party, to be the leaders of some of these committees. And I would also say in the Texas House, it's been a power-sharing thing all along. In other state legislatures, Matt, it's not like that. It's like it is in Washington, where, if there's a Democratic speaker, then it's only Democratic chairs. And, in fact, years ago, when they were first starting to put computers in the Capitol, going back to like 1998, when Quorum Report first went online, there was a discussion about putting PCs in people's offices, and the speaker at the time, who was a Democrat, was asked the question. They said, "Well, wait, you're going to give computers to the Republicans too?" That's how they do it in other states. They don't even get good office assignments or anything if they're in the minority party. Around here, they don't treat the minority that way.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a lot of accountability that comes with that. One of the problems I see in Washington is that there's no accountability. If you are the minority party, you just don't have power. Even if you see something going wrong, there's not a lot of anything you can do to stop it.
Yeah. Around here it's more of a coalition-style government. That doesn't mean that we don't end up with, policies that reflect what the majority party wants, but certainly the minority party always has at least a seat at the table.
So one of the big things that we're seeing, or we're going to see coming up, is the fact that we have redistricting coming. Now, I've got a couple questions for you, just because this is something maybe non-election issue, but it's going to have a big deal with Texas. What does it look like? Because I know they cut off the census earlier than kind of was expected. Is that going to affect Texas, or do you believe everybody was counted as it should have been?
I wonder if the Biden administration, if that's what happens, and I'm looking at television right now, like you probably are in the studio, and Biden taking the lead in Pennsylvania, on the verge of the presidency, is what it says on CNN right at this moment, and I think Fox News and the others sort of reflect the same.
Well, I think they have a lawsuit with Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure how the lawsuit's going to be in Georgia, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump can win without Georgia. Yeah,
this is down to the wire, as they say. If Joe Biden becomes president, you may hear however many billions of dollars it costs to do the census, $5 billion or something. You may hear $5 billion blowing out the window, because they may want to redo that count and try to get it right. There is some talk among the Democrats that the current administration has rushed things and not counted everybody the way that it should have happened, especially during the pandemic. So we'll watch and see what happens with that. And, of course, the legislatures are not allowed to, or they can't go ahead and do redistricting until they have the information about the census transmitted to them from the federal government. So that's something we'll keep an eye on, with no predictions about how that's going to work. But I think that we may see the possibility that if the information comes from the federal government, fairly quickly, that it could be during a regular session of the legislature that they take up redistricting. Otherwise, they'd have to wait and do it later in a special session.
Yeah. So what does it look like as far as with the way the governor has used his power? Does it look like now that we know who's going to be in the office? Does it look like they're looking at restricting the governor's power?
It's a great question. There has been less talk about that lately. I think members, both Republican and Democratic, have been sympathetic to that argument. People I've talked to on both sides of the aisle have said, and this was sort of during the height of the coronavirus response when they were saying it, that the governor certainly needs to be reined in. The way that he's able to just change laws on the fly under the Disaster Powers Act rubs a lot of people the wrong way. That has died down a bit. I think people were focused on their reelection efforts, and of course now that we're past that, maybe some of those conversations will start up again, but it certainly wasn't only conservatives or only liberals who were upset with the governor about the way that he handled things. And I think a lot of conservatives I talked to would say it's not specific to Governor Abbott, even though he's the one that's there and is making a lot of people unhappy with his response right now.
Yeah, what if it was Ann Richards?
Well, that's right. They worry about what if it was a Democratic governor down the line or some other Republican governor. Forget about party and exactly the personality. Should the governor, whoever it is, should the executive be able to just do pretty much anything they want and not only do it in response to something, but also do it because they think there might be some threat developing down the line.
Yeah. Well, Scott, is there anything else going on? You got anything on Quorum Report that you want to talk about?
Well, we're going to be, digging into exactly what's going to happen with this new administration in the Texas House. We've got an incoming speaker who's going to be figuring out his way going forward. There are some proposals to maybe get things moving along a little faster, maybe a one-day special session in December to go ahead and elect the new speaker and have Bonnen, Speaker Bonnen move along so that they can have some continuity and get working because there's so much to get done. A tight budget situation, the COVID-19 response, redistricting, and all these things that we're talking about are big, heavy lifts, and they need to get to work.
Right.
And maybe it's time to go ahead and have that transition. I know they're starting that debate.
Well, they tried to get rid of Bonnen a long time ago, and they weren't able to do it.
It didn't work out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll remind you, quorumreport.com, and we're talking to Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report. Scott, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again here in a week. See a lot of stuff moving all the time.
Thanks, Matt. Talk soon.
Thank you. All right. News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO, Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. We'll be right back.